Makes a huge difference if you'll do me a favor by subscribing and liking the podcast wherever you listen. It goes a long way. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy. Rosalind Chow is a professor of organizational behavior and theory at Carnegie Mellon University at the Tepper School of Business, and is also affiliated with the Social and Decision Sciences group at Dietrich College. Her research, teaching, and writing focus on how we all participate in social systems in ways that have implications for the maintenance or attenuation of inequitable outcomes. As such, we all also have the power to rethink how we engage with and in the social systems we inhabit, and how to use our social connections to elevate others. She currently serves as the faculty director for Climb, which is offered through the Tepper School of Business in partnership with Deloitte. Climb focuses on preparing professionals for leadership positions in the accounting industry. Prior to Climb, she served as the founding faculty director for the Executive Leadership Academy. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Columbia and a PhD in Organizational Behavior from Stanford Graduate School of Business. She lives in Pittsburgh with her family, and in this conversation we talk about her life and her career and how sponsorship works, how she thinks about sponsorship, the difference between sponsorship and mentorship, and how we can sponsor others and be sponsored in the workplace to improve our future career outcomes. I hope you enjoy. Rosalind, welcome to the Wisdom of Life.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I wanted to start off with your book, The Doors You Can Open. What first inspired you to write the book?
So if you had asked me like 10 years ago if I was going to write a book, I would have been like, who are you? First of all, who would want to hear from me? And what on earth do I have to say that would be like worth anybody reading? But then what ended up happening was I started teaching in executive education programming. That was a huge stretch for me. I talk about it in the book. But after doing that kind of work for a while, realizing that I had a perspective on sponsorship and networking that resonated with a lot of people, but also they kept on asking me if I could point them in the direction of like more resources. And I just didn't have like things to point them to that thought about these topics in exactly the same way that I did. So I was like, well, who better to write the book than me? And it was also at this strange point of my career. I had just come up for tenure. And for a lot of academics, that's kind of like the point of the midlife crisis, where you're kind of like, I finally got the thing that I've been working so hard for. What do I do to provide more meaning in my life? Like in a different way? This is a place where like an opportunity to try doing different things. So it was kind of like a confluence of all sorts of different factors that made me think like, I have something to say. I think it would be really helpful to a lot of people. And as an academic, I don't have that many avenues for sharing what I'm thinking about. So the book was basically my attempt to do that.
That's pretty remarkable when you look back on it. I think you went from that imposter syndrome, like, well, what would anybody care to hear about me, even though, or my perspective, right? Like my thoughts, even though you were teaching. So people are paying to come, glean from you and grapple with that to, oh yeah, like I'm the person to write this book and present this resource so that it can benefit people. When you like look back on that transformation, like what does that make you feel? Like, how do you feel about that? So I think that's remarkable.
I mean, when you put it in that way, it is remarkable. Honestly, I do think that teaching made a huge difference because as academics, um, life is life in general is hard.
Yeah.
But life as an academic is like in a way extra hard because we are trained to tear each other down. Like it is not on the teaching side, but on the research side because there's this emphasis on rigor and wanting to be as accurate as possible. The way we help each other is not to pat each other on the back, but to tell each other what's wrong. with what we're doing. And so the life as of a research academic is essentially constantly going out and having people tell you what you're doing wrong. It's like constant negative feedback. And at the end, when you get like papers accepted, it's not because people think it's good. It's just that they couldn't find anything like big enough wrong with it to like let you get through the hoop. I mean, obviously that's not true for how everybody experiences it, but a lot of academics, if you ask them like, well, how do you feel about this paper being published? They'll be like, well, first of all, I'm very proud and I'm grateful and I'm happy. But also, I am just incredibly relieved because that was just like 4 years of my life where I had to like fight with people and convince them that what I was doing was, theoretically novel, empirically sound, like all the things. So that contributes a lot, I think, to academics often feeling like imposters because they're constantly told that, like, this is not right. But teaching is one of the rare places as a professor where you can stand in front of people and actually give positive reinforcement, where you can say something and you can see it manifest like in the moment. This notion of like, aha, like, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that before. And I can see how that applied and can change how I see like something that happened to me in the past. I can see how like going forward, I might do something a little bit differently that could be really useful. And that positive feedback is probably what you're seeing in the book, is that like because I taught, because I got that positive feedback, I was able to overcome this sense of like, what do I have to say? Why would anyone listen to me? So thank you to all the people who were in my exec ed classes and my students who like thought I had, had important information to share, because that really did give me the confidence to go forward and say, okay, I think there's something here that is sufficiently different that it would be worth my while to try and put that down on paper, and also potentially worth other people's while to actually read. Because there's clearly like two parts of that. Like I could write lots of stuff, but people might not care to read it.
Right. What makes it worthwhile, valuable for them to read it?
Yeah.
What do you think was that differentiator between you saying yes to that executive education course and saying, no, that's not right for me to do that?
So this was a program that was specifically for Black Americans in Pittsburgh. I'm kind of not supposed to say that anymore, but I'm gonna say that because that's what it was.
Yeah.
And there were so many reasons to say no. Like, I'm not Black. That was like reason number one. I'm not Black. And it's a program for Black professionals where part of what the organization wanted to do was like create a cohort, like a community of Black professionals that would give each other kind of emotional support. And you're kind of like, why would you bring in an Asian American woman to like do that? So that was like reason number one not to do it. Number two was I had never really taught in exec ed previously. I had actually taught once. It did not go well. No one has to tell me that it didn't go well. I know it didn't go well. Exec ed never asked me to come back for years. And that's how you know that it didn't go well. Like I impressed nobody. So you're just kind of like, here's this woman who, one, is not Black, two, does not have experience in engaging with, corporate professionals and executives, and all of a sudden you want her to be in charge. Like that is like the craziest stretch assignment like you could possibly imagine. Yeah, there were all sorts of so many reasons why I was like, this does not make any sense. But then I also talked to some colleagues where they were like, well, think about all the programs that have come before that also wanted to try and create this kind of community for Black professionals. If your program doesn't work well, it's not like it will have done poorly if you're thinking about like relative to other programs. Like most other programs also have not done well in this. So the bar is really low. And then the other thing, and it was also kind of like, well, if you don't do it, would you regret not having done it? Like if somebody else did it, right? and you saw what they did with it, like, would you feel upset about not having taken that chance? I mean, I think there was also some kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't see myself as a person who shrinks from challenge. And this would essentially be that. It would be like, I know this is going to be hard and I'm too scared to do it. And I didn't that's not generally how I approach things. So, I was really glad. I mean, in the end it all worked out really well,
Yeah.
and continues to be an amazing program that I'm very proud to be associated with and continue teaching in. But yeah, it was a little dicey at the beginning there.
Were you pretty nervous, anxious,
Oh my
apprehensive?
gosh. I was like, yeah. No, I remember it was the first day of the program. It's me and like 28 like participants sitting in the room. They're all like my age or older, but of course I look younger than I am, so I look even younger. And they're all looking at me and I'm looking at them, and I actually remember having a moment where I was kind of like, screw it. I am just going to say, like, the elephant in the room, which is like, why am I here? Like, let me tell you. I'm not sure I know why I'm here either. Like, here are the reasons why I should be here, and here are reasons why I shouldn't be here, just kind of like laying it all out for them, but then also being very transparent about the fact that one of the reasons why I think I ultimately was a great choice for this program is that a lot of my research has to do with racial inequality. So I'm very knowledgeable about the ways that prejudice can show up in the workplace and discrimination and things like that. And while I will never know personally what it's like to be a Black person, I certainly have the ability to affirm their lived experience, and not only to be like your feelings are valid, but also to be able to say, and this is what the data has shown about these experiences. This is not all just in your head, like we know through studies that like what you experience is real. And then I also shared a little bit about my experiences as an Asian American, which, while clearly different from what it would be like to be a Black American, there are sufficient similarities that I think they understood that even though I might not fully understand the experience of being Black in America, I understand enough that they could see that like I was truly passionate about inequality and trying to just people throw around the word ally now, but at that time I think it was just very clear that I was a very heartfelt supporter.
Yeah. When you think back on that, like, what was that? Was that like a floodgates type of feeling, calling that out and being that open? Like, did that really elevate the buy-in, amplify like the conversation, the discussion, or like build the trust of the value in this experience? Or what was that like for you when you look back on it going and feel like? I'm curious.
So the yes, because the alternative was, and I think a lot of people will go into these sorts of situations leaning on the credentials, right? I could have been like, I'm a professor of blah blah blah. I have published in all of these top tier journals, right? Like, and I'm impressive in all of these ways. I could have given them my resume or my CV. And when you think about how we do introductions of other people, that's often right? Like, this person is CEO of blah blah blah. Before they were CEO of blah blah blah, they were like CEO over here, and before that, they were VP of blah blah blah. And you give the list of accomplishments, and that's often how people how they introduce each other, or like how you introduce yourself, right? And this is something I talk about in the book, right? Is like, I mean, that's fine, but it's not compelling. It doesn't make people interested in you for you. They can see, I mean, it is a way of indicating value, clearly. Like, it's so impressive that they're CEO of blah blah blah, like Maybe they have some life experience that I could learn from. But I think when you lead more with like the person, the things that you really value, and I think in that moment, I was unconsciously doing a lot of the things that I recommend in the book, which is to lead with what you're passionate about, what your values are. Um, it's just a much more compelling way to introduce yourself to other people because hopefully they they share those values and those concerns, and that's a point of connection that you can build on with all of the fancy stuff later. But it doesn't open with the assumption that like the reason you should care about me is because of these things that I've done.
What a great lesson. What a
Yeah, they taught me so much. Like so much of what I write about in the book are lessons that came out of teaching and learning from the students.
like sounds to me like a circle.
Hmm.
Like you're preparing to teach them, and then through that, it's kind of like that idea that teachers say a lot, like, "Oh, I learned more from my students than I ever taught them."
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely that.
Yeah. When you look back on it, what are some of the lessons that, or a story, an example that like jump out for you that you learned from them?
That's a really good question. I am going to have to think on that. Because the way that, it's not like they like taught me, it wasn't the, let me tell you, Professor Chow. Like, but certainly I feel like, their willingness to push me, some of the ideas in the book, I think some of them were very candid in telling me like this is a very privileged view of looking at how the world operates, and it is not, consistent with my experience of the world. And those are always opportunities to reflect on hidden assumptions that you have. I don't have a specific example in mind, but like I'm sure as we speak that like one will come. Truly, I learned so much from them, but I don't know that I can articulate it.
Yes. Yeah. But you're living it.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd say from our offline conversation, I think so.
Thank you.
And how, we haven't talked about this yet, and feel free to answer it how you want. But like, how does your own background and the experiences shape how you think about opportunity and choice? Like you said, like they said, well, that's a privileged viewpoint, or
Hmm.
like I'm curious, yeah, how your past shapes your research, your work, that sort of thing, or interest.
So I feel like part of how I see myself is as someone who is neither here nor there in all sorts of ways. And I'll explain more on what I mean by that. So, my parents were immigrants from China. When they got here, we were very poor. My parents both worked through college to pay their own way. When I was growing up, I remember I wore my brother's hand-me-downs. And it wasn't until I got to sixth grade, I remember one of my friends pulling me aside and being like, you should probably start buying your own clothes. Like they tried to stage like a wardrobe intervention. Except we were financially kind of like not in a place where like we could do that. Like my mom was like I stepped up to my mom shopping in the sales section of Gap, but not to the point where like my mom wasn't buying me clothing that was like two sizes too big for me because she needed me to like grow into things. Like it was always with the mindset of like we're gonna stretch this as much as we can. We also did the immigrant thing, which was my parents moved to a very expensive neighborhood so that my brother and I could go to one of the best public schools in the area. So I grew up in La Jolla. I
Oh
always feel
yeah.
weird when I say that, right? But La Jolla is like a very she neighborhood, very wealthy in San Diego. And I'd always, I always feel conflicted when I say that I'm from La Jolla because I think it leads people to see me in a certain way, and it's certainly not how I see myself, but I can see why they see that. And certainly my parents we were lucky enough that I think my family does, we now live very comfortable lifestyles. But that was not, it wasn't always the case. And so just by going to La Jolla public schools, I was kind of socially ostracized because I, despite being able to live in that area, did not necessarily have the means to partake in all the other things that were expected or normal for children who grew up in that area. And so there were a lot of things that I didn't do, that I was different in that way. And that was like a very rough time of my life. I would say I did not enjoy that. But it was, I guess, it was this mix, right? It was like I live in this very wealthy area, but I am not actually wealthy. So, but I am clearly wealthier than others, right? So you're kind of like neither here nor there. And I feel like Asians in America are kind of the same thing. They're not white, but they're not black and Latino. Like, yeah, there are ways in which Asians experience racism, but it is not the same way that black and Latinos experience racism. Not that it's supposed to be a contest, but like there's a reason why most of the time Asians are not really, they're not really um they don't have programming that's like focused on them, right? In terms of corporate initiatives and trying to like make increase diversity and things like that. Like Asians are usually not part of that conversation. So I think part of the unique perspective that I bring is that I can see both. Is that I have experience being privileged, but I also have experience not being privileged. I have experience with getting, like, having certain benefits associated with who I am, where I grew up, things like that. And I also have experiences where there's like not having certain things have worked against me. And I do think that that is perhaps a unique perspective that I can bring to bear on when we're thinking about things like social inequality, where you typically only think about the people on top or the people on the bottom, and you don't really think about the people in the middle.
Did you start, like, do you think that that experience started to shape you thinking about social inequality from like looking at over here and looking at over there, and like, or when or how did that start to formulate or bubble up for you in this, in your research and your interests?
You know, if I wanted to tell a better story, I would say that I recognize, like that I was like outraged at the injustice at a very young age,
Yes.
and like, and that burning desire like carried me through.
Yeah.
No, I was a very late bloomer when it came to thinking more critically, I would say, about social systems. About I had really, I think, bought into this idea of like, well, if I work hard, like then I get the things, without, and I never really thought of myself as, or I never thought of my Asian identity as being key to who I was. And
Interesting.
that really did not come into play until I got to graduate school, but even more so when I got to Pittsburgh, where there are like no Asian Americans. Because when you're in California, Southern California, you're like surrounded by Asian Americans, right? And so it's like, it wasn't like a thing that made me feel particularly unique or different in any sort of way. I realize now how that might have played a role in some of the experiences that I had growing up, but I would say that was like, this is all very retrospective. I got into this because purely by chance. I originally went to graduate school thinking that I was going to work on organizational culture. Um, the research that I had done when I was an undergrad was also looking at cross cultural differences between whites and Asians in how they process information and experience emotions and develop personality. So I thought in graduate school I would just continue doing that. Went to grad school expecting to work with a very famous faculty member, got to grad school, and very quickly realized that famous faculty generally don't have time to train students.
Yes.
And so I very quickly realized, like, this guy's really famous, but I'm never going to get trained if I don't, like, I'm going to have to find my own way. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to the person who's still hungriest, which in this case was the one assistant professor in the department who had not gotten tenure. And that would be my advisor, Brian Lowry. And I went to Brian and I said, Brian, I don't care what you like tell me to do. I will work on any project. I don't care. I just need to learn how to do this. So he put me on this absolutely terrible project. I'm so glad it didn't work out. It
Thanks,
was
Brian.
something that I like really did not want to work on. So the project didn't work out. And I said, well, Brian, I actually really enjoy working with you. I'd like to continue working with you. And he said, well, here's the thing. I don't have tenure and I'm working on something that I think is really cool, but I don't know if it's going to turn into anything. And so if you work with me, it's going to be really risky. If everything works out, you and I both, it's going to be good. But if it doesn't work out, we're both going down. So it's up to you. If you would rather kind of take the safe choice and work with a faculty member who's more established and you're working on ideas that have more traction, or you can go over here and like climb this mountain that no one's ever climbed and you have no idea if you're going to like get to the top. And I remember telling him, and this is like actual words, I was like, sign me up for the mountain. Like I did not sign up for like easy things like this. I want, if doing it the hard way is going to get me somewhere more exciting, like that's what I want to do. And I'm very grateful that that ended up working out well, but it was definitely a risk. So I'm glad he let me in on that risk. Of course, because of working with him, I'm able to reframe and re-understand a lot of these experiences I had earlier in my life, but it's the same kind of reframing that is so gratifying for me to do as an instructor for students. Is like, let me tell you about a different way of seeing the world that's going to expand how you understand not just like things going forward, but also things that have happened to you in the past. It's such an incredible gift to be able to give that to people.
Yes, I can see that in your face because you talked about meaning earlier with tenure. I got to think that gives you an incredible sense of purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
Or how would you answer that?
I think that is true. It certainly gives you a very clear goal.
Mm.
There are very clear, well, actually, not even that clear, but there are metrics that are put in front of you. Some are clearer than others, but it's a goal where you can say like I got it or I didn't. And you know, as we know, goals are really motivating. So, you know, I love learning. I really actually do enjoy doing the research. I don't love publishing research, but I like doing the research. Like I said, I don't love the part where people tell me that I'm wrong and how like I need to do things over and over again for years upon years. But the process of discovery, of thinking through ideas, of thinking through the implications of those ideas and how that can change. Again, going back to this idea of like, is there a different way of seeing something? Right, in a way that illuminates and broadens our understanding of how people behave. That's really the thing that I think keeps me going. And there are so many ways to achieve that. Publishing research papers is just kind of like for academics the easiest way, I guess. It is not easy, but it's one way of demonstrating that you have that capability.
Yeah. The most direct way, maybe.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't even call it that direct. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Or clearest.
sure.
Clearest, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to go back to, for a second. So you wanted to work with this one faculty member who was incredibly accomplished, and you're like, okay, I won't. You realize like I won't be able to get access to this person. What made you think like, okay, I'm going to go to the hungriest person?
To succeed as an academic, you have to be hungry. Like the field selects for a certain type of person because, you know, whereas like companies, it's all about quarterly profits or quarterly reports, right? There are like these very like temporally proximate goalposts or markers for that type of work. In academia, they essentially give you years where they leave you on your own and they say, we don't really care how you work. Maybe you publish 3 papers in 1 year and no papers the rest. That's not actually a great idea, but maybe it happens that way. But by like year 7, we need you to have published a lot of papers, be highly regarded within your field. You should have given a lot of talks at different institutions. People should know who you are. And you have 7 years to get that done. And there are very few formal goalposts along the way. So the only people who succeed under those types of conditions are people who are inherently extremely ambitious and motivated and can keep themselves going. Otherwise, you're like definitely not cut out to be an academic. You're much better off going into a different setting where you have more consistent touch points for determining if you have made progress.
And then the second piece said, Brian said, okay, like this could be risky. And you were like, all right, I want to climb this mountain. Did you pause it all and confer with anyone, or was this an immediate response like, yes, I'm in. You want to go climb Everest? Let's go climb Everest.
No, Brian told me that, and I was like, that's it. Yeah, I'm climbing the mountain.
Yeah. So you knew it in your gut?
So I have this, and it's funny because my husband and I disagree on this point. I think I was socialized to believe that suffering is the key to growth.
If you're not suffering, you can't grow.
Kind of, right? Like suffering is how you know to appreciate when you're not suffering. Kind of, like it's the lows that dictate how the highs go. Like it's all relative. So if you want to achieve great things, there has to be a progression. And so, so when somebody's telling me like you can take the easy way or you can take the hard way, I'm like, I'm going to take the hard way because if I make it to the top, it's going to be oh so much more meaningful, right? I'm not saying that's healthy, by the way.
Yeah.
This is one perspective,
Right. Of many.
but it's not necessarily the right or only perspective you could have on life.
Yeah. Was that perspective instilled by growing up for you, like by the people who raised you, your family life, like that was that philosophy and approach?
So this is a funny thing. No, I don't think my parents ever said anything that I don't know where I got that from. Clearly my parents were not like everything is hedonic, like just do what you enjoy, do what's easiest. But neither did they say like the way to show progress is by suffering. Like we were not a pro suffering household. Like this was not just like suffer to suffer's sake. That was not what it was. I honestly have no idea like where that came from, but that I think it continues to be an approach that I take toward life. Like when we even think about that decision to lead this executive ed program, like clearly that was not the easy choice. That was the risky choice. It was the mountain choice. Now that one I needed a little more coaxing. I wasn't immediately like, sign me up. But when it was pitched as like, would you regret not having done it? That was the trigger, right? It was like, oh, I mean, would I regret not having climbed the mountain? Yeah, I would. It would mean that I hadn't pushed myself. Stagnation is not fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you think you're pushing yourself now?
Should have known that was coming.
We can edit this.
Well, um, so the honest answer to that is right now I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I probably could be pushing myself more. So first of all, writing the book was definitely pushing myself. Like that was a skill set it's very different from any other kind of writing I've ever done. The book is actually pretty personal. There are parts of the book where like I've had good friends read it and then be like, I never knew that
Wow.
about you, and it's very strange. despite all appearances to the contrary in this conversation, I do consider myself a relatively private person. I don't like being in the spotlight. And so it is strange to, when I meet people who have read the book, to have some level of familiarity with me and to feel like they know me in this deeper way, which they do because I shared that, but I didn't share it myself, right? Like they read it. And so they have this experience of knowing me in a way that I don't have of knowing them or of having necessarily deliberately opened myself up to be known by them in that way. So it's very strange. And that's definitely a new thing for me. Speaking on podcasts is a new thing for me, right? Like promoting this book is, I don't love self promotion. Things that I don't do well, I like to joke that the reason I wrote the book, like I wanted to study sponsorship, is because I don't want to self promote myself. So I want to convince other people that promoting other people is a good thing. So hopefully someday somebody will want to promote me by sponsoring me, right? But yeah, so that has also been, I would say, an area where I've been pushing myself. But yeah, I am actually kind of looking for my next mountain right now.
Yeah. How are you looking for your next mountain? Like, what does that process look like for you?
I mean, as you probably saw, those last two mountains, well, I guess one of them well, both of them I chose, but they were opportunities that presented themselves and I said yes to them, right? And I'm guessing that that's probably going to be along the same lines. Like, I didn't generate those opportunities myself. I mean, the book, you could argue, was self-generated, but to me didn't feel like it was self-generated in the sense that I wasn't it was never my intention to write the book for me, if that makes sense. It was like and I don't want to say like I felt like I was called to write it because that's not what I mean either. I just mean like it seemed to me that there was a need and that I was someone who could fill that need. And I'm not a person to not step up when things are needed. So that's kind of, like, so that's how I think about that. So yeah, I suspect the next mountain will have to present itself and I will have to think about it as in a way as it being a mountain and I'll be like, that's it. Sign
Yeah.
me up.
Yeah. And maybe filling a need for others in some way.
That's generally, yes. I am more motivated by the idea of helping other people.
Yeah. Were you apprehensive to share so much so openly in your first book versus let's say the fifth or 10th book or like further down the line was there like I'm curious like what was that internal dialogue if there was about like I don't know if I should share like this first time around or what was that conversation that self conversation like because I'll say this if when I write my first book I would be very hesitant to share like a lot of personal stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't my intention to be. I didn't go out deciding like I want me to be like wrapped up in this. And I will also tell you that there were earlier versions of the book that the publisher rejected, right? So this book took me 4 years to write. The first version, the publisher rejected it and was like, you can do better than this. And I am so grateful that they did that because the first version, which was actually the second or third version by then, it was complete trash. It was terrible. It's not to say like the content was there, but it was not expressed in a way that I thought like anybody would want to read. And it wasn't until this like last iteration, most recent, the final iteration of the book where I finally felt like I was saying what I wanted to say, but I was saying it in a way that other people would want to read it. And I think probably by then I was just too tired. I'm too tired to be like, all right, redact this part about myself. Oh, let's find another example that like, conveys the same idea but is not from my own life. I don't know. Yeah, it is very personal. It was a choice to be more personal. So it wasn't done unintentionally. Ultimately, and this is what I think I tell most authors now who like to ask me, like, "Ooh, what do you think about book writing?" You want to write something that you're proud of, that you feel like you can stand behind. And I'm proud of the book. So, yeah, and also I have lots more personal stories I could share.
Yeah.
there's there's
Yes, yes. Well, I might be double clicking on those offline.
but I will happily look forward to the book that you write.
What makes you say that?
It sounds like you also are interested in hearing about other people's experiences and trying to find a way to think about them that will help you, but also in conveying their message to other people, it's about helping others as well, right?
Yes.
So the way that I think about podcasters like yourself is that you are total sponsors. You are bringing people to your audience. Your audience has self-selected into like the fact that you are bringing them access to content or thought leaders or whatever you want to call your guests, right? Like of a particular type, you're doing the work of engaging that person so that they can share their perspective. And perhaps you do a little work of reframing it for your audience. But ultimately, you are the connector. You're the one who is making that connection happen. So I consider podcasters who have like guests on all the time, like what they're doing is absolutely sponsorship. And I think there are special people who love being sponsors are special, as you well know.
Yeah, because like I've been in conversations or rooms with amazing people when I look back on the last 20, 30 years, and I'm like, "Oh, I wish more people could have had that access."
Right.
Like one example, right, I was teaching coaching at Springfield College, and I was walking down the hall with the women's soccer coach, John, and he's like, "What are you up to this morning?" And I was like, "What are you up to?" And he's like, "Oh, we're going to hear one of our alums talk just the soccer group." And turns out he was very famous. He had coached the U.S. women's national team to the World Cup title, and coach these greats, Mia Hamm, and all these, and I'm like, wait, just this small little groups. I was like, can I go and sit in? And he's like, sure, sure. And then I ended up spending like 5 hours with Tony DeChico, and but it was not just with the soccer group. I went, and had lunch with him, with one other person, buddy, another coach, teacher, and like, but that opportunity was just a few people, really. Like, I'm like, man, there was such gold in what he shared, talking about like coaching at the highest level in the world and people management and all these things. And I was like, ooh, that incredible enriching experience for me. But I can't, like, besides telling the story, that's the only way I can really share it. And so it got me
Right.
thinking, like, the podcast is a way to, like, yeah, just spread that more, even more,
Hmm.
right? Just like
Yeah.
your book and other forms.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't have to write a book. You could, but if the podcast fulfills the same need, it's just a different form.
So you talk about sponsorship. Like, how do you define sponsorship in the book? And how is that different from maybe mentorship or other forms? Like, how do you think about it?
So I have a very broad view of sponsorship, and the way that I define it is anytime we intentionally try to positively influence the relationship between other people. So the reason I think of podcasting as sponsorship is like one, you're giving access. The audience that you have would never have known, most likely, to think of me or to learn about what I do. And so by you giving access, both me and the audience, access to each other, you're changing the nature of our relationship, right? And to the extent that also you're known as someone who brings on really interesting people then just the mere signal of you having thought that I was interesting enough to be brought on the podcast is another signal, right? That changes how people see me. And so that's another reason I think of what you do as a form of sponsorship, because you are changing the relationship that people have with each other. You have changed how your audience sees me, right? So, along with your story with this coach, you asked to tag along to this very small meeting, and he said yes. And he could very well have said no, right? But he chose to invite you. And because you were now in this room that was very exclusive, right? And also because you came with him, let's say, right, has lots of implications for how other people in that room probably saw you. But then also, if you're now known as one of the people who got to be in that meeting, people who were not at that meeting are going to start will think of you a particular way too, right? They will infer something about who you are, how important you are, right? Whether or not they should pay attention to you. So I have a very expansive view of sponsorship that is really just like whenever we do something intentionally that positively changes how people see each other, that counts. Mentorship is different. Mentorship is the coach sitting down with you and sharing his life experiences with you, right? And giving you all those gems. But that's not sponsorship, that's mentorship, because that's just like him kind of imbuing you with knowledge or stories, right? And that change how you think about things, but it's not about changing how other people see you.
Huh. So, how would you advise me and others like me? Right now I'm in the job hunt, just putting that out in the world, to think about sponsorship and activating sponsorship to assist in, if it's possible, if this is even possible, to assist in my job search, my job hunt, to facilitate finding a good sense of employment, a good job.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
So what's funny about that question to me? Well, so first of all,
Yeah.
in the book, I have a general piece of advice, which is like if you want like the wrong question to ask is how do I find a sponsor? Like that's just like not a really good way to approach relationships. The thing that I say in a book, right, is like as soon as you say like I need a sponsor, I need someone to do something for me, you're implicitly putting yourself in a low power position. You see yourself as not lacking value, right? But needing something that somebody else has that you don't. And when we're talking about networking, that's like a weird position to be networking from, right? It feels more vulnerable. And it turns networking into this very transactional thing where you're kind of like, well, I need something from them, so I need to make sure that I have something that I can like exchange. And some people may feel like they don't have that something to exchange, or they're not seen as someone who has something worth exchanging for. So that leads to all sorts of issues with networking that I don't like in its standard form. Um, Now, sponsor. So the advice I give is like if you want a sponsor, what you first do is you sponsor other people. So be a sponsor to find a sponsor.
Hey.
And that's because there's value in being the connector, right? The way you get more audience is because of the value that you provide from being the connector. And the more value you provide, the more your audience is going to grow, the more the audience, like the guests, potential guests, are going to want to be on your show, right? And all of that suggests is that there is inherent value in being that person who connects people who would otherwise not know each other. And so, in a way, what you're doing right now with your podcast is precisely what I would think is right for you, especially given your particular goal in terms of employment, right? So, I don't know if you want people to know what positions you're looking for, right? But
Yeah.
to the extent that you're working in like talent acquisition or recruiting, so much of the your ability to be an effective recruiter um, is really about who do you know? Do you know the people who have the qualities or the skill sets or the experiences that your client needs? Like, let's say you're a headhunter. I'm kind of like thinking about it in that way, right? And the more expansive your network, the better able you are to make those connections between the companies that have particular needs and the people who actually fulfill those needs. And so what you're doing by doing this podcast is, one, you are essentially blowing out your network in amazing ways, right? That so many other people probably do not have. You've already shown that you know how to provide value from making those connections based on, hopefully, growing audience size. Like, if I were looking for someone to complement the people who already work with me, whose networks I think are potentially like that there's some gap in the network of types of people that they know, I would be looking for a person like you, right?
Yeah.
So I actually think that you're doing exactly the right thing right now, which is you are being actively sponsoring other people and you're creating relationships, realizing and actually eliciting information, really deep level information about your guests, right? But all of your guests are potential connectors to other talent in the future. Even if you're like, well, I don't need Rosalind for anything, but like if I'm looking for someone who might be in Rosalind's like contact list, I have a good connection to get into that network, right? So that I can start looking more expansively for the type of people that this company over here is interested in.
That's really good. I hadn't really thought about it that way, so that's extremely helpful because I like what you're talking about, not coming at it from this like weak position, like, oh gosh, please please help me,
I know.
right? Where we've all like been, I think, at some point or a time or two, right? Like looking at it more like the saying of like the more you give, the more you get.
Yeah.
Like how can we be givers? How can we be helpers? And so that it's like an upward spiral effect.
Yeah, yeah. So the way that I like to think about it, I mean, I'm sure this is not new, but so Adam Grant talks about like if you've read Give or Take or Give and Take, maybe like actually that word actually makes a difference. So which one it is? He talks about otherish givers, right? People who only give when it's also like beneficial to themselves to give. And in this way, sponsorship's not that different in the sense that sponsors are giving, but implicit in how he talks about it is that it's oftentimes win-win for the two people that you're connecting, right? It's a win for me because now more people know who I am and what I do. It's a win for your audience because they're getting access to this perspective maybe that changes how they think about, relationships, but it's also a win for you. Like, let's just be really clear on that point, right? It is a win for you because you have made this connection. And it is a larger win for the collective because without sponsors telling the world about who is doing what, the collective has no way, it has a very limited way of getting that information, right? It would require me to put myself out there and tell the world who I am, but not all of us do that.
Right.
In fact, when for some of us, right, we would be penalized for going out and being like, "Hey, pay attention to me," And so sponsors are doing like a huge service to the community. It's win-win for the audience, it's win-win for, the person who's being sponsored. It's a win for the sponsor, it's win for the community. So you're absolutely right. It is this upward spiral, and I don't want anyone to think that like when you're a sponsor, it's about being a martyr and just like letting other people use you for your network. No, you are getting benefit from allowing people to access you in this way. Now you may not want people to do that with you, right? We could talk about that on at a different time, but it's not. Yeah, no one's asking anyone to be a martyr.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think Adam writes about that in give and take. I think there's
Hmm.
a section on it's like where you gauge, okay, like are people, when I'm giving, are people using it in the best way? Are they taking advantage of me
Right.
in a negative way? And it's like, I think back, like being a kid and like helping a classmate or something with their math homework or their school or something like that, or on a project, a group project. And it's like, at what point does it become where they stop taking an active role in it, and you feel like, well, I'm just doing this for them.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think it's like a nuanced. It can be a nuanced gauge of like
Hmm.
going, okay, was this beneficial for them, and in turn like beneficial for me, or was like, did somebody go against the tribe, so to speak, in a negative way, and they're abusing this connective
Right.
power.
Yes. Yes. And we have all sorts of ways to make those bad actors known.
Yeah,
Gossip is a huge part of it. You know, I mean, like nobody wants to be taken advantage of. And yes, sponsors, that's the thing. If you decide to remove your support. I mean, podcasting is a different thing because it's not like you can be like, well, that listener is not giving back, right? Like I'm cutting him off. Like there's you don't really have a way to do that. Um that's not exactly the model we're working with here. Um, but for like interpersonally, right, if I am giving someone access to my network and they start abusing that access, either by not living up to their promises so that like my relationships are harmed with the other people that I'm connecting them to, you got to believe I'm going to cut that person off real fast. Like, I do not want to be associated with them or for my relationships to be harmed by my association with this person. So that's the other way, right? That we have to essentially police that people are using the network appropriately.
yeah. Yeah, I remember talking to a mentor of mine. He was the men's tennis coach at Stanford for almost 40 years and very accomplished, won 17 national championships, team championships, all this. And so I was talking to him at one point. I was like, how do you decide when somebody asks for that recommendation for the next job? How do you decide whether you're going to give them the recommendation and what you're going to do for the recommendation process for them being, a top three candidate or something like that for at that other institution? And it was interesting because he said, well, he's like, Chad, I've been working for a long time, for decades, to build up my reputation. And so I want to make sure that by doing this, there's no possibility or just dramatically decreasing down to zero if possible. That if I say, hey, I think you should take a look at this person, this job opening, that it's going to come back on my credibility.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, that's a really good framing. And so I was like, thinking about, because he's thinking future oriented,
Yes.
not
That's
just
right.
past oriented, what they've
That's
done up
right.
to this point.
Yeah. And earlier you were like, well, what's the difference between mentorship and sponsorship? That's another key difference, right? Is that um mentorship gone wrong is like, oh, the mentor and the mentee like don't get along, right? Maybe there's like a break. The mentee doesn't take the mentor's advice, right? But there's no one really the mentor in that situation is not harmed reputationally in the same way that sponsors can be harmed reputationally depending on the actions of the person they're recommending. So sponsors are really like they are giving up control. They are taking a risk in a way that mentors are not.
Yeah, and it's a public risk,
Yes, that's right.
which is way different than a private risk.
Right.
Wow. Well, Rosalind, I could keep talking to you, and I will, but not now, right? Because I know you got things you got to do. So we'll close out round one here, right?
Okay.
Where can people find more about you and your work, your book, follow you, and also any like closing thoughts that come to mind for you?
Sure. Like I said, self promotion is not my strong suit. So if it's like, how do you find out more about the book? You could go to my website, rosalindchow.com. You can find the book at Amazon or bookshop.org, anywhere I like to buy books. I post semi regularly on LinkedIn. Again, in keeping with all the things that we've talked about today, I don't really post about myself, but what I do love to post about is great research that other people are doing. So if you're a person who is really interested in learning about kind of like the newest social science research, particularly as it relates to bias, or hierarchy or power, I would like to think that I do a reasonably good job of translating academic research in a way that is accessible to most people. So that's probably the best way to keep abreast of the things that I'm thinking of. Parting thought is that anyone can be a sponsor. So just wanting to disabuse people of the notion that the only people who can sponsor are people who already have lots of power. Anytime you say something nice about someone else to a person who doesn't know them, you're sponsoring them, right? Because you have given this other person information they wouldn't have known about otherwise, and that has changed how they see or think about this person, so that if they ever should meet in the future, you will have created it will be more likely that the two of them are going to get along swimmingly than if you had not said anything at all. So don't think that just because you aren't a powerful person in your company or anything like that, that you can't be a sponsor. You can. Just make sure that you share other people's good news. And that is the easiest way to be a sponsor.
I love that because to me it's like you're speaking to everyone, letting them realize, giving them permission in a sense, helping them give themselves permission to take that positive action to support others versus going, well, I don't have that title, I don't have that power, I don't have that, so I'm just gonna not say
Yeah,
anything, not do anything.
that's right.
It's a pay it forward approach.
Yeah. I like to think about it as Yelp, right? Like, why is Yelp useful? What do you pay attention to? You pay attention to the 4 and 5 star reviews, right? Like, and people who pay into that ecosystem are creating value for the collective. And you can do that too. It's that you're not Yelping for restaurants or service people, you're Yelping for other people.
Yeah. And that's incredibly powerful and incredibly cool too. Like, because
Yeah.
I want to live in a society and I want to create a society, and be part of creating a society that does that. That like is a positive Yelp place to live and work and operate.
Yeah. I would love that too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, this was incredible, including our conversation offline. So, yeah, amazing. And you said you didn't want to promote your book like that self promotion, but I think it's more about, I'll do this, I'll say this here, is like, I think it's more about like people realizing, filling the need for them, right? It's helping them. That's why you wrote it. So, I encourage my listeners, go out, buy her book, read her book, because you're going to see how twofold. One, it can help you, right? It can help me, but also how I opportunities can help others. And that's incredibly gratifying and powerful. So thank you for taking the your time, your energy, your insights, your expertise to not only come on today and share this, but like to do that work.
Well, thank you. It's opportunities like these that give me that feedback, right? So that I have the confidence to feel like I have something worth sharing. So thank you.
Yeah, you do. You really do. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you liked it, please share with a friend on social media. That goes a long way to promoting this podcast so I can continue to interview and share these conversations with fascinating people. You can follow me on social media, Chad Stoloff, and visit my website, chadstoloff.wordpress.com, for more information. I'd love it if you would leave a review to support the podcast. Thanks so much. Until next time.